I want to ask you a question. If somebody sneezes, what is the normal reaction that somebody says? They sneeze.
God bless you.
Yeah, God bless you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Dyer County, Tennessee, according to a report, I think it was CBS News out of Charlotte, said in a high school class, a boy sneezed.
Okay.
And a girl said, God bless you. So what happened to the girl?
No, don't tell me.
She got kicked out of class, she got suspended from school, and her teacher said there'll be no God talk in this classroom.
That is despicable.
Tennessee,
Tennessee, the Bible Belt. What's happening?
But that's how bad it's gotten. And you'd think, what in the world is going on? Well, it's worse than that over in the Middle East. The ISIS savage who severed the head of James Foley is most likely a British citizen. There was a headline in the British London paper said one of the Beatles. I mean, it was kind of a joke. But 3,000 of those Muslim monsters are believed to be Westerners. And that makes ISIS' outrageous threat to drown all Americans in blood even more menacing.
Intelligence officials fear these Islamic recruits could get back into the United States before anyone realizes it. Mark Martin has the story.
The ISIS militant shown beheading American journalist James Foley speaks English with a British accent. That raised so much concern in the UK, Prime Minister David Cameron cut his vacation short.
From what we've seen, it looks increasingly likely that it is a British citizen. Now, this is deeply shocking.
British authorities believe several hundred of their citizens could be fighting with ISIS, but that's just a fraction. Some estimates put the number of Western Muslims joining ISIS in Syria and Iraq at up to 3,000. In addition to Britain, they come from France, Denmark, and even the United States, creating a serious danger for the West. The concern is these jihadists will use their Western passports and terrorist training to return home and carry out attacks there.
Some of those foreign nationals who may at some stage seek to return to their countries of origin and carry out attacks in them.
We will be vigilant and we will be relentless. When people harm Americans anywhere, we do what's necessary to see that justice is done. There has to be a common effort to extract this cancer so that it does not spread.
Right now, I'm not seeing the U.S. government under the Obama administration taking the kind of action needed to crush ISIS. We need to crush this group, stamp them out before they pose a direct threat to the U.S. mainland.
And many people criticize the president for playing another round of golf after talking about the beheading of James Foley. Other Islamic terrorist groups, not just from the West, are now supporting ISIS, including from the Philippines and Yemen. The Obama administration announced Wednesday that the president sent special ops forces to Syria this summer on a secret mission to rescue American hostages, including Foley, but they did not find them. He has stepped up airstrikes against ISIS, but to wipe out that terrorist group, much more military action may be required. Mark Martin, CBN News.
You know, the president is wonderful in showing empathy and sympathy for people who've been beheaded. You know, you just think, how empathetic can you get? We're outraged, the civilized world. And then he says, don't you understand, though, ISIS is not on the side of history. Don't you understand, don't they understand that history will ultimately prove them wrong? No, it won't. History will not prove them wrong unless the United States gets in there and kills them. And it's amazing how many people now on the left spectrum who've been saying nice things about Islam are beginning to say we need to go and kill these monsters. It is an infection that is going to spread and metastasize, and it's going to hit London, it's going to hit Paris, and it's going to hit New York and Washington. So if we don't act now, it's an existential threat to the safety of all of us. And ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry to tell you that we have a man at the helm in this country who doesn't understand the game. And then the fact that he makes that statement and then runs to the golf course, I mean, that isn't the kind of photo op you want with the leader of a coalition that's going after a group of monsters. Well, in other news, Israel is making Hamas pay a heavy price for its attack on Israeli citizens. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Pat, Israel says its targeting campaign has killed 3 senior Hamas military leaders in Gaza. They were on Israel's hit list for a number of kidnappings and bombings, including the capture of an Israeli soldier 8 years ago. John Wagi has that story.
For a second day, Israel launched targeted airstrikes to make Hamas leadership pay a price for breaking a ceasefire with more rocket attacks. And Hamas is paying a steep price. The 2 commanders, Mohammed Abu Smala and Ra'ad Attar, helped plan deadly attacks on Israeli soldiers and civilians, including the kidnapping of soldier Gilad Shalit in 2006. Hamas claims the top terrorist on Israel's list, rocket supervisor Mohammed Deif, escaped an Israeli airstrike that killed members of his family.
This message is directed to the Zionist enemy. Mohammed Deif will be the commander-in-chief of the army that will enter the Holy Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem.
Israel says it is uncertain whether Deif is still alive. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, aware of the impact of atrocities committed by ISIS in Iraq, made the link with the terrorists of Hamas.
Hamas is ISIS, ISIS is Hamas. They're the enemies of peace, they're the enemies of Israel, they're the enemies of all civilized countries. And I believe they're the enemies of the Palestinians themselves. And I'm not the only one who believes that.
Despite continued calls in the UN for a return to talks in Egypt, the fighting in Gaza rages on, and Hamas losses are building by the day. John Wagi, CBN News.
Pat, what's it going to take to end this particular round of violence?
I hate to tell you, I think that Hamas is playing a game. I've been talking on this program as to what is going on behind them, because it seems irrational, the thing that they're doing. It has no basis in any kind of rational discussion, unless you think what they're trying to do is to incite enough hatred against Israel so that Hezbollah comes in from Lebanon and Syria gets in somehow into the act, and Iran comes in on top of it. And that's what they're looking for, and that's what I see is going to happen. I understand Israel has just called up another 10,000 reservists, so they're in for the long haul. And Bibi Netanyahu isn't playing games. He's playing for keeps, and you wish that our president would do the same thing. But what's going to stop Hamas? The only thing that's going to stop Hamas is all of them get destroyed. That whole area in Gaza has got to be rooted out, and it's going to be bloody, and it's going to be painful. And when that happens, when Israel happens, when it happens, mark my word, Hezbollah is going to start lobbing rockets in from up in Beirut in that area, and the Syrians will come in, and Iranians will begin to get in the act too. It just as sure as the sun rises, it's going to happen. John?
Here at home, the American missionary doctor who contracted the Ebola virus while working in West Africa has recovered. Dr. Kent Brantley of Samaritan's Purse is set to be released from an Atlanta hospital today. He fell ill with the virus while treating Ebola patients in Liberia. Aid worker Nancy Wrightbull also contracted the disease in Liberia while doing missionary work as well. Brantley and Wrightbull were flown to Emory University Hospital earlier this month for treatment. Wrightbull also is expected to be released soon. Bank of America has reached a $17 billion settlement with federal and state authorities over the sale of mortgage securities leading up to the 2008 financial crisis. It is the latest and biggest action yet between the government and big banks. But as Paul Strand reports, some critics say these settlements don't really help the financial system at all.
To dodge threats of civil or criminal trials, banks are paying huge fines for their supposed financial sins that helped bring the economy low in the 2008 crash, even if they didn't commit those sins themselves. For instance, take the case of J.P. Morgan Chase. They had to pay $13 billion in a settlement with the Justice Department. That amounted to half a year's earnings, and it was the largest penalty ever paid by an American firm up until then. But critics say J.P. Morgan Chase wasn't even involved in most of what the government called misconduct. Most of the misdeeds were perpetrated by Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual. The government went to Morgan and asked it to take over those two failing banks. Then years later, went after Morgan for what those two banks did.
It was a shotgun wedding where the New York Fed said, please take Bear Stearns. And then to turn around and say, well, you know, you're responsible now legally for what Bear Stearns did. We're going to take it out of your shareholders.
And now the federal government is saying, by the way, you're going to have to pay penalties for what those banks did, the very same banks we insisted that you buy.
I think that is just a horrible message. It means that in any future financial crisis, the healthier banks are going to say, I don't want anything to do with this.
Kirpin says Bank of America is in the same situation as Morgan, paying for the sins of another bank it bought when pushed.
You look at Bank of America, they didn't issue those Countrywide loans. They bought Countrywide afterwards.
And the Justice Department has gone after other banks as well. You've seen Citibanks. Their company, Citigroup, is coughing up $7 billion.
This is a witch hunt against a lot of these banks that were not necessarily the bad actors in the first place. Why are we going after we should go after the sinners, not the people who are trying to, you know, have a recovery for our economy.
The question is, why is the Justice Department doing this? What do they have to gain? Some critics say the administration is trying to placate critics who argue that justice had to go after the major banks for their actions before the crisis in 2008. But others have blasted the Justice Department. A Wall Street Journal editorial called Justice's settlement with J.P. Morgan Chase last November the Morgan Shakedown, and said the lesson is how government has used the crisis to exert political control over even the most powerful private financial companies. An Investor's Business Daily editorial called it another mugging on Wall Street. And a columnist for Time magazine wrote that the Morgan settlement does absolutely nothing to make the financial system safer. Officials appear more concerned about appeasing anger over the financial crisis than doing the harder and more politically contentious work of re-regulating the banking system properly. And Kirpin agrees Justice's actions aren't really helping matters, but he says they are hurting the economy. Because banks are so frozen in fear, they're leery of loaning money. Instead, they're saving up billions in case they have to pay fines in the future.
It's very difficult to get loans, and that has a very negative impact on the economy, not just in housing, but across the economy, because small businesses in particular are finding it very difficult to get financing right now.
Now, all of the banking system has this hammer over its head, which is the federal government and the Justice Department coming after them for activities that many of the banks weren't even involved in. So I don't think it's fair, I don't think it's good economics, and I think it's an abuse of the power of the federal government.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Pat, your thoughts. Does this help or hurt the financial system?
You got to be kidding. Of course it hurts it. I just can't understand what's going on. It is a bait and switch. It is a betrayal of the first order. You remember back in the days of George Bush presidency, and the banks were failing, and you know, Bear Stearns was going down, Lehman Brothers going down, and so forth. And so they decided they want to come up with a $750 billion TARP package to rescue troubled banks. And in that package, they were saying the real sickos will pass them over to some of these healthy banks. And in order to accommodate the Treasury Department, J.P. Morgan says, okay, we'll take over somebody. And then they went to Bank of America, said, you're a healthy bank. How about taking over this Countrywide deal that was Mazzillo and his cronies out there on the West Coast? And you'll do us a great favor. And so Bank of America said, okay, we'll do it. Now they come back around and say, well, whoops, we got you. You took over somebody that was bad. And you say, well, we did it to accommodate you. You asked us to do it, government. And now government says, we're going to get you $17 billion. Is it going to help? Of course not. It's going to weaken the banking structure. This is the profit, I believe, of the Bank of America for the last 2 or 3 years, and they're going to strip them of those profits. Who gets the money? It goes back into the Treasury, I guess, but I mean, who got hurt? And what is Treasury trying to do? And why is Bank of America rolling over? Well, they roll over under the threat of criminal prosecution. Why do you prosecute somebody who's doing what you ask them to do? You're doing the government a favor and the government hits you in the head. We've got a bad government. It is dangerous to every human being. If they'll do that to Chase, if they'll do that to Citicorp, if they'll do that to Bank of America, they'll just as easily do it to you. Now, I want to call on my good friend Al Gore and tell him the Farmer's Almanac goes against your doctrine. What are you going to do about it, Al? John?
Pat, get ready for a cold, cold winter. That's the prediction from the Old Farmer's Almanac. It says the eastern two-thirds of the country will face a super cold winter, which translates into colder than average temperatures of about 2 to 5 degrees difference. The Almanac's editor calls it refrigeration. The book also predicts summer will be warmer than usual in most places, and California's drought will likely continue. The Almanac makes long-range forecasts by referring to the study of sunspots and prevailing weather patterns. And Pat, I don't know if you know this, but the 223-year-old publication has about an 80% success rate.
Burr. Get your fur coat out. I've got great winter clothes, and we just haven't had any. So
we had a cold winter last winter.
Yeah,
that was the coldest winter I can remember, and all the snow we got here in Virginia Beach. I am not ready for that yet.
Have you been listening to stuff in Ferguson, Missouri? The news has been...
Well, they finally came out and said that there was evidence that Brown charged the officer and beat his face in.
His occipital bone was crushed.
This would have been nice information to have about a week ago.
I don't understand why they haven't done a blood test on that guy, on the dead man, to see if he had PCP or some other kind of hallucinogenic material. Because he acted like somebody who was crazy.
I believe that they did show that he had been smoking pot.
Well, pot wouldn't make you do the stuff he did. It had to be something worse than that. But in any event, he charges the officer, and somehow they make this big racial case, and Eric Holder goes down and said, "You don't understand what it's like to be a black man, and I was pulled over by the cops years ago when my vehicle was searched." Okay, the big, great 6'5" giant charges this little cop and beats the daylights out of him, and the cop is in fear of his life. Now, he shot him too many times, no question. One or two would have probably deterred him, and that was bad, but nevertheless, police can use deadly force to keep from being killed.
And nice to have a stun gun in a situation like that, too.
Much better. But in any of this, there's some error. But to have the national thing, and of course, you know, the friendly preacher of Tawana Brawley comes in, and he makes a statement, and everybody makes a statement, and all these activists come in from California and New York. It's an outrage. And then the Russians come in and say, well, you see, you've got your own problems. How dare you preach to us? It just looks bad. But if we'd just gotten the facts earlier, I can't understand why they withheld this stuff. This big guy robs a convenience store, pushes the clerk to one side, goes marching down the street, blocking traffic, and the cop tries to stop him, and then they said, well, the cop didn't know he'd done something in the convenience store. Now it says, yes, he did know. And, you know, the whole thing, well, why didn't they get the facts out?
I know. I was same thought last night. Why? That was criminal in itself, withholding that information.
And this stuff perhaps would have been avoided, but now, oh man. But Eric Holder, grandstanding, I'm going to stand up for the oppressed. I mean, did the big guy beat the cop up? And if he did, the cop had a right to stop him. But the question is, you're right, he should have had a stun gun, but maybe they didn't issue stun guns to them. That would have stopped him. Well, I'm sad to see it, but this era of racial tension, and it's been a hot summer.
The Supreme Court is delaying the start of same-sex marriage in Virginia. The court has granted a request from a county clerk in Northern Virginia to block same-sex marriages in the state while the issue is being appealed. Without court intervention, same-sex marriages would have started today. Most other federal court decisions in favor of same-sex marriage in other states have also been put on hold. Hall of Fame quarterback Jim Kelly is cancer-free. Doctors first diagnosed him with oral cancer in the middle of 2013 and removed the tumors, but they found a recurrence of that cancer back in March. The doctors now say chemotherapy and radiation treatments have eliminated his illness and his pain, and the former Buffalo Bills quarterback is now able to function normally. His long battle prompted support from thousands on social media with the catchphrases "Kelly tough" and "prayers for JK." Kelly told ESPN, "I still need those prayers." And you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.